Enzo Caruso's private office wasn't like the glass towers that define Manhattan's skyline. It sat on the third floor of an old brick building in Tribeca, behind an unmarked door that only a select few knew how to find. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of aged leather and faint traces of cigar smoke. Dark wood paneling covered the walls, and a single amber lamp cast long shadows across the mahogany desk. A silver clock ticked steadily on the mantel, the only sound breaking the heavy silence. Everything about the space whispered control, tradition, and an unspoken warning not to waste his time. Enzo himself was a study in restraint, tall, clean-shaven, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that fit like a second skin. At 38, he ran his world like a man who had learned long ago that power wasn't loud. It was quiet, deliberate, and absolute. The people who worked under him knew the rules without being told. No lateness, no unnecessary words, no bright colors, and absolutely, under no circumstances, no curvy women. That last rule had never been written down, but it was as solid as the foundation beneath his feet. His mother, a sharp-eyed woman from the old country with opinions carved in stone, had taught him what was acceptable and what wasn't. Anyone who didn't fit that mold didn't last long in his presence. Cheryl, his assistant for the past decade, knocked twice before entering. She knew better than to walk in unannounced. "Your 11 o'clock is here, boss," she said, her voice steady and professional. Enzo glanced up from the leather-bound folder in front of him. "Resume?" Impressive, Harvard MBA, fluent in French and Mandarin, 6 years with a Fortune 500 company. He nodded once, his expression unreadable. Credentials were the only thing that mattered. "Send her in." The door opened and the atmosphere in the room shifted like a drop in pressure before a storm. She didn't walk in. She arrived. Confident, poised, radiant. Viola Anderson carried herself like someone who had earned every inch of space she occupied. Her mocha skin glowed softly under the amber light. A light lavender dress hugged her figure, modest but undeniably highlighting curves that Enzo's mind had been trained to dismiss. She extended her hand with a smile that didn't ask for approval. It offered something else entirely. "Mr. Caruso, it's a pleasure." Enzo stood slowly, hesitated for a fraction too long, then took her hand. Warm, firm, grounded. He pulled his own back quickly, as if the contact had burned through his composure. "Miss Anderson," he said, his voice low and even. He motioned toward the chair across from him. "Sit. We'll talk." As she settled into the seat, he couldn't help but notice the effortless way she moved, confident without arrogance. Her curly hair was pulled into a neat bun, her makeup subtle but flawless. He tried not to stare. He failed. She noticed, of course, but didn't let it show. Enzo leaned back slightly, fingers drumming once on the armrest before going still. "Your resume is solid," he said, flipping through the pages with the precision of a man cataloging every detail. "Why leave a position like yours to come here as an executive assistant?" Viola met his gaze without blinking. "Because I want to observe a different kind of leadership. One where excellence is expected, not requested. Your reputation precedes you, Mr. Caruso." That answer was both flattering and strategic. He hated how much he liked it. "And what makes you believe you can thrive under my expectations?" She tilted her head slightly, a small smile playing at the corner of her lips. "Because I don't break under pressure. I break pressure apart." For the first time in years, Enzo smiled. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a crack in the armor. After she left the room, Enzo sat in the silence for several minutes, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. Cheryl re-entered with a raised brow. "Well?" "She's different," Enzo said, adjusting his cuffs with slow, deliberate movements. "Different good or different complicated?" "Hire her." Cheryl blinked. "Wait, what?" "Trial basis," he interrupted, his tone leaving no room for debate. 2 weeks. If she doesn't fit, she's out. But he already knew Viola Anderson wasn't the one who might not fit. He was the one whose rules had just been rewritten, and he hated that he didn't hate it. The first week was a study in self-control. Viola was flawless, not in a robotic, mechanical way, but in the way she made excellence seem effortless. Every calendar invite was sent 10 minutes early, Every file was color-coded and tabbed in ways Enzo didn't even know he needed. She'd adjusted the lighting in his office without being asked, so the headaches from staring at documents for hours disappeared. She even started keeping mint tea stocked in the small lounge area, something his late grandmother used to do for him as a child. He found himself looking forward to her briefings, watching her when she wasn't looking. But it wasn't just attraction. It was disruption. Viola challenged his comfort zone simply by existing in it. She didn't apologize for her body, her background, or her brilliance. One afternoon, as they walked out of a tense meeting with one of the family's longtime associates, Enzo found himself walking beside her instead of ahead. "You handled that objection well," he said quietly. Viola glanced at him, her expression calm. "Thank you. I figured you were about to tell him off, but that wouldn't be your brand." He tilted his head slightly. "You figured out my brand already?" "I read people fast. Your brand is power with polish. Controlled, never chaotic." He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "And you?" She met his gaze without hesitation. "My brand? Fire wrapped in silk." He stared at her for a beat too long, his mind catching up to the reaction in his chest. Then he cleared his throat and turned away, continuing down the hallway in silence. By the second week, whispers began circulating among the small circle of people who worked close to Enzo. They noticed that he seemed less cold, that his gaze lingered longer when Viola spoke, that he asked her opinion on matters no assistant would usually weigh in on. Some called it a ticking time bomb. Cheryl voiced what many thought during a closed-door conversation late one evening. "You like her," she said plainly, arms crossed. Enzo didn't look up from the file he was reviewing. "She's efficient. She's also curvy, boss, which you've made a reputation of avoiding like the plague. So either change the rule or let her go before you make a fool of yourself." He closed the file with a deliberate snap. "She's here because she's good. Period." Cheryl sighed, shaking her head. "Just be honest with yourself. That woman's not just under your skin. She's rewriting it." That evening, Viola knocked on his office door, her coat draped over her arm. "You forgot to sign off on the Macmillan proposal," she said, holding out a folder. He took it, letting their fingers brush for a moment too long. Her eyes flickered up to his. "Anything else?" he asked, his voice quieter now. She tilted her head, studying him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You look like a man fighting a civil war inside himself." He blinked, caught off guard. "I've seen it before," she added, stepping back toward the door. "Just don't let your fear win." And with that, she left, leaving Enzo alone with a folder, a silent office, and the sudden, terrifying realization that he didn't want her to leave at all. Enzo didn't sleep that night. He sat in his penthouse overlooking the city, the lights below flickering like restless stars. A glass of whiskey sat untouched beside him. He couldn't stop hearing Viola's voice echoing in his head. "Just don't let your fear win." What fear? He wasn't afraid of anyone. He was Enzo Caruso, controlled, composed, untouchable, but the truth was gnawing at him like a hidden wound. He was afraid, not of her, but of what she made him feel. Viola Anderson had become the exception to every rule he lived by, and it terrified him. The next morning she arrived early, as always. A soft blush-toned blouse and high-waisted charcoal skirt hugged her curves in a way that was professional, but completely distracting. She greeted him with her usual confident warmth, eyes bright, voice smooth, like warm honey. Enzo kept his responses clipped and formal. He couldn't risk slipping. By midweek, a crisis emerged. A major deal with one of the family's oldest partners had gone sideways. A shipment failed to arrive, and the arrangement Enzo had promised to certain influential people was on the verge of collapse. Tensions were high. The private meeting room buzzed with blame and frantic energy. Midway through, Enzo stepped away, his jaw tight, his hands clenched. Viola followed. She found him near the lounge area, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Too much caffeine," he muttered. She handed him a bottle of water. "Try breathing instead." He blinked, confused. "Breathe in through the nose, hold it, out through the mouth." She demonstrated, calm and steady. He stared, then without thinking, followed her lead. The tension in his chest loosened. "You always walk into a room like you own it," he said suddenly, his voice softer than usual. Viola raised an eyebrow. Is that a compliment or a critique? A compliment. He paused. I just don't understand how someone like you doesn't get rattled. Her smile faded into something more thoughtful. Because I had to learn how to be the calm in the storm, being a curvy biracial woman in boardrooms full of men like you. She shrugged. You either shrink or you stand taller. He didn't reply. He just looked at her, not the way he used to, calculating and judging, but like he was seeing her for the first time. Later that night, they worked late, finalizing the revised arrangement. The office was quiet. The city outside had turned a soft navy blue. Viola sat on the leather couch, heels off, one foot tucked beneath her as she typed quickly. Enzo sat nearby, reviewing documents, but his eyes kept drifting. Why did you really leave your last job? He asked out of nowhere. Viola looked up. The real answer? Yes. My boss, brilliant man, publicly supportive, told me I had the perfect resume, but not the right look to represent the company. Enzo flinched. He actually said that? Not in so many words, but I got the message. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. And yet you still walked into my office knowing my reputation. I did, she said calmly, because I wanted to challenge your type. And maybe, just maybe, you'd surprise me. A beat of silence passed between them, charged, sharp, electric. You have, she added, her voice barely above a whisper. That did it. He stood and paced a few steps, hands in his pockets. Viola. She waited, calm and composed. I don't know what this is, he admitted, but it doesn't follow rules. She nodded. No, it doesn't. And it's definitely not what I planned. No, it's not. He turned to her, his voice dropping. I'm not the man who should want someone like you. She stood then, tall and radiant, chin high. Then maybe you should start trying to be the man you used to be. And with that, she picked up her bag and walked out, not waiting for permission or explanation. The next morning, she wasn't at her desk. Enzo felt something twist in his chest, something unfamiliar and sharp. Then he found a note folded neatly in her chair. Mr. Caruso, you were right. This doesn't follow rules, so I'll bow out gracefully before we both cross a line we can't uncross. Thank you for the opportunity. Viola Anderson. He stood frozen, reading it twice. The air felt colder, emptier, as if her absence had taken all the oxygen with it. Over the next few days, everyone felt the shift. Enzo was back to being cold, silent, distant. But this time, it wasn't power. It was pain. He snapped at minor errors, skipped meetings, and stayed in his office longer than usual. Cheryl confronted him on Friday. You lost something good, she said plainly. Enzo didn't look up. She quit. You let her walk. She broke the rules. No, Cheryl said. She broke you, and that's exactly what you needed. By Sunday, Enzo sat on his terrace, scrolling through Viola's LinkedIn profile, wondering if it would be inappropriate to reach out. Then something caught his eye. A charity gala invitation. Empower her, celebrating women of color in leadership. Keynote speaker, Viola Anderson. His heart skipped. He stood abruptly, grabbed his phone, and made a single call. The gala was packed with influential names, bold dresses, and champagne flutes. Enzo arrived in a navy suit, two of his men, Rocco and Sal, waiting outside in the black Maserati. He blended into the crowd like a wolf in the wrong forest. His eyes scanned the room and froze. There she was, on stage. Viola stood under soft lights in a deep wine-red gown that draped around her like art. Her curls were down, her voice smooth and commanding. When I walk into a room, she was saying, I bring more than just curves or a color. I bring clarity and the strength to claim space that was never built for me, but now cannot stand without me. The crowd applauded. Enzo couldn't breathe. Afterward, he waited as she descended the steps. Their eyes met. He stepped forward. You weren't wrong, he said softly. Viola gave him a careful smile. About what? About me. About needing to stop being who I was. She folded her arms, not angry, but cautious. So who are you now? Enzo reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. This was supposed to go through proper channels. It's a job offer. Viola blinked. A job offer? Vice President of Communications. Full salary, full benefits, full authority. And what makes you think I'd say yes? He stepped closer. Because you weren't just the exception. You were the lesson. And I finally learned it. Viola didn't speak for a long moment. Then she smiled. I'll think about it. Viola hadn't said yes, not yet. It had been 5 days since the gala, and Enzo checked his phone more often than he liked to admit. No texts, no emails, no word. He'd offered her the position. He'd offered her a chance. But the truth gnawed at him. Viola Anderson didn't need chances. She created them. And maybe that's what scared him the most. On the sixth day, Enzo returned to his office to find a white envelope sitting on his desk. His heart leapt. He opened it slowly. Mr. Caruso, I don't want a title you gave me out of guilt. I don't want a job created to fix your mistakes. I want to know if I never walked into your office again, would I still matter to you? VA, his hands tightened around the letter. His mind ran wild with memories. Her voice in meetings, her laughter echoing through late nights, her presence shaking the cold foundation of his carefully built walls. He had chased control his entire life, but now he wanted her. And she wasn't asking for another job. She was asking for the truth. That evening, Viola stood barefoot on the balcony of her Brooklyn apartment, sipping tea as the sunset melted into the skyline. Her phone buzzed with a new text. May I show you something that matters to me? She read it twice, then replied, Where? The Hamptons. Tomorrow, 10 in the morning. I'll send a car. She hesitated, her thumb hovering over the screen. Then she typed, I'll be ready. The black SUV pulled up to her building promptly at 10. The ride was quiet, smooth, and oddly comforting. When she arrived at the property, she expected something cold and imposing. But what she saw surprised her. It wasn't flashy, it was warm, elegant, personal. Soft stone walls, wide windows, a porch overlooking the sea. Enzo waited outside, barefoot in rolled sleeves and dark jeans, more human than she'd ever seen him. Welcome, Biam, he said simply. Viola stepped out slowly, eyes scanning the horizon. This is yours, he nodded. The only place I've ever felt peace. She tilted her head. And you brought me here. Why, ma'am? Enzo walked her toward the porch. Because I need to say something, and I didn't want the noise of the city or the weight of business to muffle it. Viola sat in a wooden rocking chair, her curls blowing gently in the wind. Enzo knelt in front of her, eye level. I built a world where everything had to fit inside boxes, he began. Perfect shapes, perfect faces, controlled lives, because I thought control meant safety. She listened quietly, letting him speak. My mother used to measure worth by image. She would look at me and say, too soft. She made me fear softness, fear curves, fear emotion, and I thought that made me strong. Enzo paused. The ocean hummed beside them. Then you walked in. You weren't what I expected. You weren't what I allowed myself to want. But you were everything I needed to see. You made me question my rules, and I hated it. Viola's gaze softened, but she said nothing. I didn't offer you that job to fix anything. I offered it because you earned it. But more than that, his voice cracked. I miss you. Your voice, your insight, your fire. I don't want a world without you in it. I don't want a life without you in it. He swallowed hard, emotion rising in his chest. I want to love you, with all your brilliance, all your beauty, every curve, every word, every look that makes me feel alive again. Viola didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood and walked toward the edge of the porch. The sea stretched endlessly before them. When she turned back, her eyes shimmered. Do you know what I see when I look at you now? She asked. Enzo shook his head. I see a man learning how to be free, she said, and I don't want to love the version of you who hides. I want the one who shows up barefoot, honest, and messy if he needs to be. He stepped closer. I'm trying. I know, she whispered. She took his hand. And that's why I'm here. They spent the afternoon walking barefoot along the shore, fingers entwined, silence thick with meaning. They talked about everything. Her childhood, his regrets, her dreams, his fears. And somewhere between waves and whispered truths, they laughed. Really laughed. Not as boss and assistant, not as opposites, but as two people finally getting it right. 2 months later, headlines appeared in business journals. Enzo Caruso appoints first woman of color to executive leadership team. But the real story wasn't about business. It was about love, about a man who built walls and a woman who walked right through them. Viola stepped into her new role as vice president with grace and grit. She transformed the company's culture, reshaped communications, and proved her worth again and again. But more than that, she taught Enzo to live out loud. They were photographed at fundraisers, caught smiling at jazz clubs, once seen sharing a quiet kiss in Central Park under autumn leaves. 1 year later, on the same beach house porch where he first told her the truth, Enzo held out a small velvet box. Viola raised an eyebrow, teasing, "Is this another job offer?" He chuckled, "Only if the position is permanent." Inside the box was a simple gold ring. No diamonds, no flash, just a promise. He dropped to one knee. "You walked into my life and changed every rule I thought I needed. And now I want to rewrite the rest with you. Will you marry me, Viola Anderson?" Tears shimmered in her eyes. "Yes," she whispered, pulling him into an embrace. The waves crashed behind them, and in that moment, Enzo Caruso finally understood. Forever wasn't a plan. It was her. The sun poured like honey over the Amalfi Coast, glistening on the water like 1,000 spilled diamonds. Viola stood on the balcony of the cliffside villa, her ivory silk gown billowing slightly in the warm breeze. Below, the sea whispered against the rocks, while the scent of lemon blossoms and salt water danced through the air. Inside, the music had faded, and the guests were rising to their feet, glasses raised in celebration. The ceremony had been intimate, just 30 of their closest friends and family. No headlines, no press, just love. Viola turned slightly as footsteps approached behind her. Enzo stood there, undone bow tie in hand, his shirt collar open, his smile soft and warm as he looked at her. "You're officially Mrs. Caruso now," he said, slipping his arms around her waist. "I was already yours long before today," she murmured, resting her head on his chest. The wedding had been everything they hadn't planned. Simple, soulful, and dripping with joy. Viola's mother cried as she walked down the aisle. Enzo's father, a quiet man with tired eyes and old scars, had toasted Viola with a voice that shook with emotion. And Cheryl, ever the loyal friend, had winked at Enzo and whispered, "Took you long enough." Their honeymoon took them across the Mediterranean. Hidden villas in Greece, private gondolas in Venice, sun-drenched beaches in Santorini. No schedules, no meetings, no business. Just the two of them. One night in Tuscany, they danced under fairy lights strung between olive trees, barefoot in the grass, laughter echoing into the night. "I think this is what healing feels like," Enzo whispered, brushing his lips against her temple. Viola smiled against his shoulder. "It's what home feels like." Months passed in golden rhythm. Back in New York, Viola flourished in her role. The company had shifted from rigid tradition to a place of purpose and bold ideas. Diversity initiatives expanded, mentorship programs launched, and for the first time in its history, the organization was voted one of the best places to work in the city. Enzo watched Viola command rooms with the same passion she once used to challenge him. He never stopped being in awe of her. They traveled, built a lakeside house upstate, adopted a rescue dog named Gatsby. Sunday mornings were for pancakes and jazz, Friday nights for wine and stargazing on the balcony. They were building something bigger than a love story. They were building a life. One rainy afternoon in spring, Enzo walked into their bedroom to find Viola curled up on the edge of the bed, a hand over her mouth, eyes wide. "Are you okay?" he asked, rushing to her. She nodded, then smiled. "I'm late," she whispered. He blinked, confused. "For a meeting?" She held up a small white stick, 2 pink lines. Enzo stared, then blinked again. Then he dropped to his knees, buried his face in her lap, and laughed with disbelief and joy. "We're having a baby," he breathed. She nodded, tears pooling in her eyes. "We are." He looked up, eyes shimmering. "You've already changed my life once, Viola. I can't believe we get to do this again together." 9 months later, as snow softly blanketed the streets of Manhattan, Enzo held their newborn daughter in his arms. A perfect swirl of brown skin and gray eyes, her tiny hand curled around his pinky. "She's so strong," he whispered. eyes fixed on the baby. Viola, exhausted but radiant in her hospital bed, smiled weakly, like her mama. He leaned over and kissed her forehead, and she's already changed everything again. Viola looked at the two loves of her life and whispered, "Forever never looked so beautiful." And it didn't. It looked like a curvy, brilliant woman who rewrote a coal man's story. It looked like the family they never saw coming, but couldn't imagine living without. It looked like love that refused to follow the rules, and in breaking them, found something real.